Okay, cool. So, welcome everyone to the fourth in the Ignite series, which is kind of focused on writer-led and independent producer-led projects in the literature sector. And I guess we're building up to the Literature Project Award, or some of you may be building up to an application to the Literature Project Award, which opens for applications on the 21st of June. And closes on, I think now the 28th of July, so it's a larger window than was expected. And we've got two writers joining us today, Caelainn Hogan and Bairbre, and both have kind of very interesting careers in not just creative writing but journalism, and international kind of focuses to their careers, as well as kind of Irish projects that they've writing projects they've been working on. This particular episode, if you like, of Ignite will focus a little bit more on kind of budgets again and the nitty-gritty of the application form, but also get into the creative ideas behind each project and the degree to which they've been worthwhile to Caelainn and Hogan, and if they're paying off, you know, if they make sense financially. Sometimes you get really excited about our ideas and then they sort of grow legs and become maybe bigger than we expected, and can be kind of exhausted by the end of them. So I'm curious to hear their experiences, both of whom have received project awards and are at the tail end of their projects now. So just to introduce those writers, Caelainn Hogan is a writer and journalist from Dublin. Her book, Republic of Shame, investigates the ongoing legacy of the religious-run institutions and shame industrial complex in Ireland. She's written for the New York Times Magazine, National Geographic, The Guardian, Vice Magazine, Harper's, Washington Post, Dublin Review, and more, and many more. And Bairbre is a freelance journalist and writer living in West Cork, who's produced radio documentaries for BBC World Service, News Talk, and community radio stations. She's created several podcasts, including Wander, an Arts Council funded series with writers living in refugee camps in Greece, Jordan, Bangladesh, and Malawi. She's currently working on a Pulitzer Grant Center funded podcast, which looks at refugee-led projects in Ireland, Jordan, Greece, Turkey, the UK, and Spain. That will be broadcast on the Irish Examiner and Open Democracy. So Bairbre, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. And just to tell us a little bit more about, I know you've worked on a number of kind of podcast series and radio documentaries, but just to tell us a bit about what was involved in your Arts Council funded project.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. Hi everyone. The Wander podcast with the Arts Council. So the first season I talked to refugee writers living in refugee camps around the world. And then I put in for a second season last year, which I did in January, which talked to refugee writers in, there was one guy in England, a Kurdish writer. There was an Afghan poet who's living in Germany. There was a Rohingyan poet, a Yazidi writer, and a guy from DRC who's living in Canada now. And yeah, the idea was just to challenge stereotypes around migration and also to bring some of their fantastic work to an Irish audience, because a lot of these writers don't have a huge audience or a huge platform. So it was great to be able to bring their work to a wider audience here. Yeah. And
then in terms of like the length of the project, the build up to it, the planning, can you bring us back, if you can remember, to before the application stage? We're kind of, you know, maybe a month and a half out from the deadline. How much of the kernel of the idea was there before you were applying? Were there many partners involved, and how many of those partners, or how many of the writers were kind of on board at that early stage?
So I've been thinking about it for a long time. I think I've actually been thinking about it for like 3 years in my head. You know, the way these things just take a while. Obviously, I don't think the project grant, I think I applied the first year it was around. So I just thought, yeah, this is just ideal. It just fitted perfectly what I could do with it. I'm trying to think. I had all the writers. So before I applied, I had confirmation from pretty much everyone. except for one writer who I didn't get in the end. But, you know, mostly, yeah, I kind of am in the habit of doing that because I apply a lot through to the BAI, Broadcasting Authority of Ireland, and they like to have all these letters of confirmation beforehand. So I'm kind of in the habit of that. And also I'm in contact with some of the writers anyway. So it was just a matter of send them a quick email saying, are you interested in this? And I mean, you know yourself, writers are always interested in getting their work out there. So that was a relatively easy part of the process. It's not like some of the more journalistic projects where you'd have to maybe chase people a bit more. With writers, I find, and poets, they're quite eager to share their work. So that part was relatively easy.
And so what were the more difficult aspects then of the application process, or what did you find challenging, or were there areas that you kind of didn't quite know about?
I think it was more like on the technical side, because I did both of them during COVID. Well, I did the first one completely during COVID, so it was all online, and it's just when you're interviewing people in different places, you don't have control over the audio. So it's just, I spent a lot of time trying to make the audio sound better than in post-production. That was kind of probably the trickiest aspect. In terms of the application, just making sure all the little bits were there, you know. It's like, I think it's a fairly straightforward process, and it's, you know, you can have all the things kind of set up, but it's just making sure you've all the parts filled in, and you have all the letters from the people you're going to be working with, and you have the budget, realistic budget done, and it's just making sure they're all just lined up and in time. But I actually thought it was okay. I mean, I didn't have any huge issues with the application itself. Yeah.
And then on the, I suppose, like having the BA experience, you know about, I was saying to you just earlier, I have one failed effort at it, and it's incredibly demanding. And in terms of like how many hours it's going to take to do X, Y, and Z, so how many days work, and what you'll be doing on each hour, on each day almost. How did you, you were obviously a bit better than most people might be at quantifying how much time this would take, and then maybe putting a price or a value on that time. Did you have a kind of a methodology, let's say, of putting a price on your time or calculating how much time you thought it would take?
Yeah, I mean, I always Google as well. I try and find out online what other people are getting, even if it's I think there was Journal Resources, and there's another one in England that they're a little bit more open with the money aspect of it. So I think I was able to gauge for the BAI ones earlier how much, and then I just added a little bit extra for the Arts Council ones because I was putting a lot into it, and I, you know, I thought, yeah, it's worth it.
And what is the daily rate, as a matter of interest, for the BAI?
I have 250 down for them, but
okay.
I put 350 for the Arts Council.
Okay.
But like if I was working, I mean, the day rate for the BBC is obviously a lot higher, and it depends, you know, on. But yeah, 250. I mean, some people put less, some people put more. I'm sure I've seen, you know, when their thing comes out of what they've funded and how much it is. You can't obviously get a breakdown of each person's budget, but you can see how much everyone gets. And it's like, sometimes I'm like, oh, I should have actually put in for some more, you know, but you're just juggling these things. I think you know yourself, if you're starting off with something, you put in a bit less. So if I was doing a first time application to the BAI, I think for years I put in 200. So, you know, that's depends on your level of experience too.
Gotcha. And then in terms of, did you have, let's say, a marketing plan, for want of a better word, for the project? Like how do you reach an audience? You've created the beautiful thing, you've got some really interesting conversations with great writers, you've got it cut down beautifully. The production value of these podcasts are beautiful, by the way. And then what do you do with it? That's kind of the difficult part. And for writers who aren't necessarily producers or marketeers, this is maybe the trickier part, reaching people.
Yeah, definitely. That I still think that's the most the hardest bit. I mean, I make little audiograms, you know, so I take a little bit out and put them up on Instagram, or I try to do. I joined with this thing, it's called Canva, you know, so you can try and make social media posts in that. You know, you try and do it, but I actually am thinking for the next one of actually seeing, I don't know whether you can budget for a social media manager, but I actually think that it might be nice just to hand all that over and pay someone who actually knows what they're doing in that side of it, and just like without being too corporate about it. But I'm
Yeah,
like, I
yeah.
think there's people who are just better at that.
I think that's maybe
I joined TikTok, and I just put up a few kind of like messing videos in the last while. My daughter showed me how to do it, but I am planning on bringing Wander over to it and doing the stuff that I've done for Instagram and just developing it for TikTok, because I think there's a lot of younger viewers, and like I'm on it too, like older people too, and I just think the reach is much better. I mean, I pretty much gave up on Facebook videos, and the algorithm is just not showing to people. Instagram's a little bit better, but I think TikTok you can definitely get way more views easier.
Yeah. Scary, but interesting.
I know, but I actually think that might go to somebody like who's actually able to do that. I might for the next project, because
I think maybe that's the value of, like, we'd often encourage people, like, is there an art center in your area that would be really keen to do this, because art centers have professional marketers on board, so and want to be, are keen for someone with a great budget, with a great product, again, want of a better word, sorry, but like with beautiful podcast material coming on, and for them to be able to share, to put it out to their audience, and maybe that's a good place.
That's a good idea.
Getting it out a bit further. And then maybe just to talk about, like, would you share some more detail about the budget, because I think that's often an area that people are maybe don't predict all the costs, don't foresee all the costs, but also the various lines in the budget, but also how much time this might have taken.
I'll try and share this screen with you, will I?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much.
This is the main application form. Do you want me to go to this, or do you want me to go to the budget in particular?
Yeah, no, actually, if
I go down to the bit at the end.
See a successful application, that would be really helpful. Yeah.
It gives a bit of a rough. The one here. Can everyone see that? Is that?
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. So the research I put down 2,000. That was for a few weeks. That was like for. I probably should bring up the other budget. It was for. I can't do maths. 350 into 2.1. I don't know how many days that was.
Yeah.
It was and that was really useful, actually, to get that time, because normally you would never get that amount of research time for a project. So it gave me loads of time to really read all the authors, because I wasn't even that familiar with some of them. I was Googling interesting refugee writers who are working, and it was great to be able to order their book or order their the magazine they're in, and be able to really read and have another chat with them and do all that research, and also to do research on the country and the issue they were coming from. So I didn't know a huge amount about the Rohingya genocide, for instance, so I was able to spend time. So at least when you're interviewing people and they're reading poems about the Rohingya genocide, that you know what they're talking about. And so that was really, really useful. I actually think that that's one of the most beautiful things about the project award, that it values research, because it's an artist's grant. It knows how much time you spend on this and how much you spend thinking about.
That's great. I'm delighted to see that you valued that time, because that's, myself and Danny often talk about the job of, for example, chairing an event, where you get paid for the day of turning up for the event and being the chair and asking the questions, but there's a week's work gone into it in terms of reading all the books involved, and so it's brilliant to see that you valued your time and gotten paid for that work you put in.
Yeah, no, it's great, and I like kudos to the Arts Council for recognizing that. That's quite unusual, I think. It's very different from other journalistic things. So the recording, then again, just break down, divide 350 into that. I'm so bad with maths, but whatever that many days that was, and that was to give me plenty of time, kind of bringing in, setting up the interview. And obviously you'd want to maybe talk to people a little bit before you record. There's always like you're messing around with dates, so that's all like time that takes to and then the actual interview itself, which you're like going to be at least the 2 hours either side of it, you're going to be very focused on it. So that was for those days. The 1,000, again, that was for the scripts and the insert, because when I was starting off, I forgot to kind of actually put in this. It was like, the amount of time you spend, creating the flow and the narrative of the each episode. It's not just like here's blah. And I like to take out my voice a lot from the original interview, and get a flow going with maybe just a little insert, or if I can take it out altogether. So that was
so chunks of audio get rearranged, let's say,
yeah,
to make the narrative
yeah.
work. It's really interesting because I guess I edit kind of interviews for text sometimes, and I do that a bit guiltily, let's say, thinking that we're killing the authenticity of it, but I also believe it's worth it because you're
you can ask. I always ask people. I ask them, I say, is it okay, because this isn't live, I'm going to be chopping it up and moving it around and editing it and taking out my voice and doing bits, and it might be in sequence, but I will never take anything out of context. I'll never misrepresent your words, and everyone's usually fine. But an odd person maybe might want to hear it first, and then they're happy, and put that up.
Okay.
And it's very easy to just drop someone an MP3 of it and just say, look, is this okay? And just check with them. I've had once or twice with other ones where people did want to take something out, and that's fair enough too. But so that's the scripts inserts. Yeah. And also I think as well, especially with this project, because the people are reading poetry, so sometimes the poem went in better at another point. So if they were talking about something and then the poem fitted in better. So I think that was another reason to chop it around as well. The artist fees, 2,100. So again, that was 350 for each artist. So again, 350 into that, whatever that was. I think there's 6.
Must be
people
6.
in this. Yeah. So I have one left to do. That was one problem I have. So I have a voice actor and copyright. This is the one I'm kind of still working on. He was a guy called Latinas. He actually drowned in the Mediterranean Sea a few years ago. And he was a Sudanese poet, and I'm still trying to get in contact with his family, because I don't want to, I could just pull it up, I have his poetry, but I just want to get in contact with them and give them the copyright money and clear it with them, and then go ahead. So I'm just, that piece of that episode is still not done, so that's still to do, and I'm not sure if I don't figure that out soon, or if I don't get in contact with them, I might have to do something different. So I suppose that's one example where things change a little bit.
Sure.
Just, you just adapt. The recording software, so that was for a subscription with Squadcast, which is much better than Zoom if you're doing online interviews. It records everything in WAV, and it records each person's in a separate file. So you're not bleeding into each other's audio file. So that's a really good one to use. And sometimes if the connection is really bad, sometimes people I interview are in they might be in a camp, or they might be somewhere where the Wi-Fi isn't great and the connection could die, and if you're on Zoom you might lose the interview. But with Squadcast they back everything up to the cloud, and you can go and get it. So that's a really good one, Squadcast. I think also I put in, under the recording software, I bought another few tools for Cubase, so RX8, just little things that help the editing easier and make the sound better. So editing, so this was the biggest part, 5,000. So I don't know whether I was 2 weeks. This is kind of hard to quantify. I always end up doing more than I budget for anyway, but I still think if you budgeted for all the editing you do, it would just be too expensive. It's like writing a book or something. There's no way you're ever going to get the actual amount of labor you put into it, but you're happy if you get a fair price, or fair, but that was very fair, I thought. And I spent, that covered my days. I still have a little bit more to do, but I spent pretty much all of January and February doing this. So that's kind of 2 months of work. And I think it's fair enough. The uploading and writing content, so that's another week that I spent, which I still am working on. And I entered into a podcast competition as well, so the Irish Podcast Awards. So that covered, that 50 bit, and the little things like that you kind of forget about. I don't know if you can put in a MISC category. Maybe you can. I'll have to see what Caelainn thinks about that. Just a little MISC thing. Maybe
I think
cover art.
Larger organizations might put in contingency, and I think it's completely fair to put in like 5% contingency for things costing more than you may have expected. And certainly for things like print, for example, you get a quote, and 3 months later, the budget's
Gone up.
the offer's
Yeah.
gone up. So
Okay, I'll remember that. Okay, I've learned something. That's good. And then the cover art was 200. So it was the artist that I got for the first season, I gave him 350 that time, and then I gave him 200 to use this extra. So he was very happy with it. It's to use, his painting. He's a Afghan artist. He was living in Moria camp at the time. He's since moved to France, so they got relocated, thankfully. And that was it, I think. Oh, hold on. Yeah. So 15.5 grand, which like for 2 months, I mean, it's not more, it's 2 months, it was 2 months full on. I mean, I'm still doing a little bit to do with it, and obviously a lot of pre-work as well. But I mean,
there's the preparation, the application.
I think that's a very fair, very fair award. Like, I think it was enough to cover my work. It was enough to cover the expenses, and yeah, and a lot of freedom with it. So like, I mean, you give the original one, and then you give at the end you give the the how you got on. So the one I did in the year before I didn't charge as much, and I spent less time on it, and I only did 4 episodes, I think. But this one I expanded it a bit, and it was more work, and I charged more. But yeah, I think it's very reasonable.
No, I think it's great. I like, as someone who hasn't made a podcast, and I don't know if others will agree with me, but I kind of imagine it as being like a day's work recording, maybe a day's work or 2 days work editing per episode, and then that's with any kind of amateur or outsider just has a simplified view of how these things are made, but this application has the real whack of experience of it, and kind of real thorough kind of predicting your various kind of costs and the different kinds of your own work involved. So it's not just producer fee or creator fee 10,000. It's like you're really showing the Arts Council here what the work will involve. And I think if the fact that your fee is in kind of 5 different lines of the budget makes a more compelling case for, let's say, kind of looks like about.
Do you want me to show you the budget notes? I have that on a different one. Do you want to see that, or just to give people a quick look at the kind of, so this is the actual one where I go through their one, and then I go for each one, I give a little note, and I think that's useful to do that for the Arts Council. So just go through each of them and explain what exactly, why it's costing that much, and and then it gives them, they can come back if they want and say, no, you're charging too much for this, or it gives a bit.
Yeah. Well, I just realized we're coming up to half an hour, so I
wow, okay.
want to Caelainn as well. But just before I do, it's something interesting, and I could just ask Danny about it for her thoughts on it. I thought, Bairbre, your question of experience, working out your daily rate based on experience, and maybe €200 being a more, let's say, entry-level production fee. And Danny and I are trying to, and with a group of writers, are putting together a document that sets out minimum fees for writers and writers as producers. So just wondering, Danny, if you've any kind of thoughts or reflections on that, on Barbara's kind of, if you like, attitude towards the...
Yeah. I think, well, the thing is, there aren't strict guidelines as such for our art form yet on what we should be paid. There are the Words Ireland guidelines, and as Brendan has said, Match in the Dark is going to publish something on this with feedback from writers on types of activities that they're engaged for and what they get. I suppose I would always say to people, I always feel like artists aren't paid enough, so I don't think you're going to really be over budget ever. And like you've said, Barbara, you often will do more, you won't do less. Like, nobody ever does less, it's always more. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And I suppose in the context of a project award or other awards, I would say that either it's a daily rate or a weekly rate. And I suppose I've worked on different projects as a collaborator and as a creative director and various, but there are other people in art forms, you know, such as visual art, who charge 400 a day, you know, to go into, you know, a place, a school, wherever. And I think we need to kind of be mindful of the fact that I feel in literature that we're still establishing the guideline price of what we're happy with. But I think, like you're saying, the research time plus editing time plus marketing time, you know, even like sharing things online via Instagram and TikTok, wherever you are, all of that is time. So I think it's really good to have a conversation on the go and to keep the conversation going about what do we think is fair, what do we think is comparative, and what do we think ultimately is the direction we need to go in. But I would be saying, if you're doing a daily rate, for anyone who's going for an award, if you're doing a daily rate and you are a professional artist, I would say 200 is the minimum, you know, 200, 250, I think is the minimum. Now, if you're going to break it down for yourself in terms of a month's work or a few weeks, then maybe it makes sense to pay a weekly rate, but it depends then on the nature of the project. You will know yourself, I think, hopefully, what is fair or commensurate with the effort. But I would say if it's, you know, if it's a number of weeks or a number of days, we definitely are not overpaying ourselves. I've yet to meet a writer or a literary producer who's overpaying themselves. So I really appreciate you sharing the budget, Bairbre, and I think it's very good to have this practical information available to people.
Yeah, nice one, Danny. Thanks, and thanks, Bairbre, again. Caelainn, I'm going to come to you now. So Caelainn, you wrote a really groundbreaking book, Republic of Shame, but another great example of a writer who has published a book, doing really well, it's in the media, but then you have the idea to give a second or a third life to it through various kind of mediums and means, and applied for the project award to that end. Could you kind of just introduce us to what you did apply to do and how it came off?
Sure. So I had an idea to do a sort of series of events around the book, to help, I guess, continue the conversation around the ongoing legacy of the religious run institutions, the mother and baby home institutions, and Magdalen laundries in Ireland. And I had, through writing the book, met so many survivors and generational survivors who actually were writers or musicians or artists themselves, and were creating work, creative work, in response to their own experiences and the legacy of these institutions. And I wanted to sort of create a space where survivors could share these responses, and where they could sort of engage with audiences in a new way. Having written the book and talked about the book, so many people would come up with their own stories, and we wanted to create a space where an audience could also share their experiences as well, where possible. And so I think it was actually as well seeing Brendan, your work with Ian Malini on his tour from Minor Monuments, that sort of inspired it as well. And then speaking to Danny, who had obviously worked with the Live Network, so a wonderful group of venues that we sort of had a talk with about putting on an event centered around creative responses to the institutions, and creating a space for survivors to speak out about their experiences, and about the injustices that these institutions perpetuated. And so it was a bit tricky because this was obviously interrupted a bit with COVID. We had an idea to do live events, where we would be in venue, and we could, open it up to the audience and meet people and speak to people about these experiences. But what we ended up doing was a series of mainly online events, which were sort of very intimate, but actually, in a way, it being online, I think some people felt even more comfortable to speak, and sort of survivors did attend these events and shared their own experiences. So that was really powerful. And I think one of the most important things about the project award for me, which I think I only realized after the fact, and would have maybe devoted more time to it was the actual space and time for the people, the sort of core collaborators I worked with, to develop their own creative work. So I worked with Jess Kavanagh, who's a musician and poet and writer, and Noelle Brown, who's a playwright, a writer, and an actor, and Terry Harrison, who is a musician and a survivor, a mother who was sent to two of these institutions. And all three of these people are sort of generational survivors of the institutions. So the project award actually allowed time and space for them to create new work that we then shared through the events. But that was really important. And I think often people are sort of reluctant to ask for money for that time and space. But some of the venues we worked with were really willing to even offer up space and had space sort of dedicated for that. We also did an event with Poetry Ireland and Maynooth, which became sort of a recorded video of creative responses. And this was an idea I worked on with Anne-Marie Quirin and Kimberly Campanello. So sort of it was a really interesting mix of events, and I can actually share the link to that video. But we sort of did a mix of different approaches to this, and given the video, that involved sort of working with a videographer and sort of sound engineer, and we also had a digital producer as well for some of the online events. So there were sort of a lot of moving parts to it, and I was essentially producing these events as well, which was a very new experience for me.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's going from being an independent freelance writer who's hitting deadlines, working from wherever you happen to be, to not just putting in the application, but corralling so many people. How did you find that? And did you, let's say, predict the amount of time that involved? Did it surprise you how much work was involved, or did you have a sense of how big it would get?
I think it was more work than I expected. I had sort of budgeted myself in only as I guess a reader. I did readings of these events from Republic of Shame, and sort of gave myself a speaker's fee, but I didn't consider the work I'd be doing as a producer. And I really enjoyed collaborating with people. As a writer, I think the work can be very solitary, especially as a freelancer. So it was actually a really wonderful experience to collaborate with so many different people outside of literature as well, to work with a videographer and a digital producer, etc. So that part I really enjoyed. It did take a lot of time, but I enjoyed it. The promotion side of it, I think, was probably the most challenging, or the part that I didn't enjoy as much. Obviously, events take a lot of promotion. And when they're online events as well, you sort of, I think, get into that that sort of, you feel like social media is the way to promote them. And I think if I went back and did it again, I'd probably think of maybe different ways to engage people, whether it was we did promotion through articles in newspapers, and I think we did some radio interviews as well. But it's definitely made me think of different ways to reach out and engage an audience, because I think social media is always the go-to, but I think there are other ways to reach out and sort of, and to reach people who might not be on Twitter and Instagram, who might want to join those events. But it was a really rewarding experience for me, and a new way to sort of share those testimonies and provide space for people to speak out.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, like, from a sort of mercenary commercial point of view, did it help the book, or did it get the book into the hands of other people, get people talking about the book? I know it sounds like it wasn't for that for you. It was about creating a chance, for people to continue the conversation, as you said. But did you have a sense that it kept the book alive to a degree, or?
I think it did. I think, if it had been in person, I think the live events, we did one live event in the Riverbank, and that in Kildare, and that was really that was quite different because, we were there in person, and at the end of the event, we did a book signing and I was able to meet people. And we also had members of the audience who were survivors share their stories at the end, and we did a sort of Q&A. But afterwards, people who might not want to speak in front of fellow audience members would have come up and spoken to me. So that was a great part of it. But also, I think, in terms of sharing the book, the in-person event was probably better for that. Um, but yeah, it kept the conversation going, and allowed me, I guess, through readings as well, to explore different parts of the book, because we were able to work with venues across the country. So Kildare, Drogheda, Longford, Tipperary, Cavan and Roscommon. So to really reach out to a lot of different people around the country, and sort of help them engage with these testimonies and with the stories from the book.
I suppose I mentioned with Bairbre, and encouraging others maybe to consider partners and what value they might be able to add. Did you find that those partners, those venues, were able to add value in terms of marketing or outreach, or did it maybe also add to the number of people you had to corral or had to engage with, and kind of increase your admin time? What are the pros and cons there, would you say?
I don't think I would have been able to do this without working with Danny and working with the venues, because I was sort of so ignorant of how any of that worked. And even in putting together the budget, the venues were able to tell me sort of the value of their space. And that's something you have to sort of balance in the budget, is how much the value of the venue you're using, or even a workshop space, would be, and then you balance it with the cost. So I really didn't understand any of that until I was able to collaborate with and the live network, and speak with venues. So I think that's something I would encourage people to do, is reach out to their local arts center or venue. And there was also a venue in Cork. We didn't end up doing the event because of COVID, but people were really open to the idea when I reached out to venues myself as well beyond that, and very willing to work with me as a writer on creating an event, especially if we were able to get funding, to put that on. And so yeah, I wouldn't be scared to approach a venue and work with them. I think that was really helpful to have their insight and support, especially when creating the application or actually applying, to know sort of the worth of what the venues were offering as well, and
Yeah.
to be able to show that, to bring that to the table when applying. So to work with something like the Live Network, and also Words Ireland also supported the project as well. So to be able to work with people who had sort of produced events like that before was really invaluable, I think. And yeah, it definitely added in. I think that's something to consider. If you've got multiple venues, you're going to be dealing with multiple people. Even within that one venue, you're going to have the people who are doing promotion, the people who are
Yeah.
running the event. So yeah, it becomes a very long email thread
Yeah.
sometimes. So
You got to meet a lot of people by email.
you do,
Yeah.
like it's an interesting network that you build through running these. But yeah, so factor that in, I think, for time as well. But yeah,
I
again,
might just comment there, just on Live Network, because you're mentioning, Caelan. Just for those who are watching this or listening to this and may not be aware, as Caelan has said, Live Network is a grouping of 6 venues that are spread out across 6 different counties. And I began working with them in 2018, and we produce and host writers and literary productions and outreach in various projects. And I suppose one of the things to note for anyone who might be working on either an application or have, just something on an ongoing basis that they'd like to float, I suppose if the Live Network are on board with a project or an initiative, it just means off the bat that 6 venues in 6 different places will support something. And I suppose in terms of admin and planning, that can be really handy to get that in the bag. And because I liaise with the network, I sign off on projects on behalf of the network once I kind of pitch or discuss it with them. So it kind of means instead of going to 6 people individually, there's a package there, you know, and that was sort of is one of the strengths of Live Network. So if anyone's listening or watching and has questions about Live Network, there is a dedicated page on our website for Live Network, so you can see the types of things that have happened. But I'm always interested to hear from people on something that they want to do, and it's a circuit outside of the festival circuit. So Caelainn obviously has been to a lot of the festivals as well and venues in the city, but Live Network is a concentration of regional venues, which is great too, because it means really good work and really interesting stuff makes it, you know, to counties where people may not be aware that they could go previously.
Thanks, Danny. And I guess, you know, not just those 6 venues, but our experience with talking to other venues is that they don't really receive as much proposals from writers as they do from artists in other fields. And it's, I guess, because, you know, perhaps literature, its home medium is print, where a venue is, you know, we associate with theatre and music and that kind of thing. But venues are certainly interested in, you know, putting on things in the theatre, but also curating things that happen within that county or for their audiences. There's the Pig's Back Journal up in Donegal is connected with the North, I think it's the Northwestern Cultural Centre up there. But there's workshops, you know, there's everything that happens within literature, all the different mediums or outlets or ways in which writers work in literature can be connected to an art centre or a venue or an arts office. Or so there are people there who kind of want to hear good ideas from experienced writer producers. And as Danny said, we're very keen to hear your ideas too. And over the next week, we'll be meeting with some of the people face to face who are interested in kind of developing their ideas ahead of this project award, but also outside of the project award generally. So we're happy to help where we can. Just to come back to Caelainn and Bairbre, if I may, with kind of a final question of, you know, your learnings or advice that you give to people about to kind of take the same course that you did maybe this time last year or 2 years ago. Caelainn, can I come to you first?
Yeah, sure. I think factor in the time that it will take you, if you're going to be the producer of those events, to consider yourself as the producer and factor that into your budget and allocate money for yourself. It can be hard to do, but it does take up a lot of work. And I think if I was to do it again, I might also sort of allocate someone else to promote the event who would have the time to do that on top of everything, and maybe, you know, feel more comfortable doing it. So that might be a consideration for budget as well, you know, marketing and promotion, and even handing that over to someone else. But yeah, I think a really rewarding experience applying, and do reach out, I think, to people who've done it for support in terms of the budget. That was probably the most daunting thing for me, because I just am particularly good with numbers. So, you know, putting that all together, the venues were really supportive, and you know, people who had applied before are really helpful. And you know, I think people are really, who you collaborate with, are really willing to give letters of support, you know, for each artist and musician and writer that I was working with, and even the videographers and the sound engineers and the digital producer that we worked with. I had letters from all of them expressing their interest and commitment to the project that were included, you know, along with their CVs. So that, I think, helped as well, if they can really express the importance of the project to them, and you know, their willingness to collaborate. I think that really helps too, and it gives you a sense that, you know, you're doing something worthwhile as well, even just for boosting your own confidence in applying.
Brilliant, that's great advice. Yeah, and just to say, like, while the Arts Council does want to pay artists and writers through this project, I think it also understands the need. Any funder will understand the need for professionals and the value of professionals outside of the arts, whether they be kind of marketing professionals or, you know, for anyone, let's say people recording podcasts, but without Barbara's kind of experience, that sound engineers or editors, that kind of thing, can go into your budget, so that the project award is this kind of broad reaching, fund all kinds of things, and so needs to fund all kinds of professionals too. So thanks very much for that, Caelainn. I guess same question to you, Barbara.
Yeah, what Caelainn was saying there, just value your time and try and think of all the different things that you might forget about what you're going, the amount of time you're going to spend on it, and just, yeah, and the social media thing, I definitely think, I mean, yeah, if you can get someone to do that, I'm definitely going to do that for the next project. I mean, if you love doing it, do it yourself, but it's a particular skill set. And just go for it, you know, like, don't pick, you know, obviously a project that you really love and are passionate about and that you want to spend a lot of time on, and this really allows you that space and allows you to really focus on it in a very unique way. I think it's a really, really cool grant award. And if anyone needs any help with any of the podcast aspect or anything in particular, that, you know, reach out to me if they want privately. That's okay. If there's something they're not sure about, or I don't know, need any aspect of that. And like you said, there's loads of sound engineers and editors, and you can work with them. And then you can focus on the thing that you love doing. And if it's the writing part, then you focus on that, and you don't have to do everything, because, you know, podcasting is a particular skill. I do think, like, most people can do it with a little bit of practice and a few YouTube tutorials, and, you know, and a lot of time. But at the same time, you know, it mightn't be something you want to invest a huge amount of your time and energy in. And if you're a writer, you might want to just outsource that to someone, and that's, you know, that's a good idea too. But yeah, just go for it. Like, just put in the application, and like Caelainn was saying, just have the letters from everyone you're going to be working with, any of your partners, any people you're going to be working with. Like Caelainn was saying, it helps you as well, because you know as well who's going to be interested. So you don't want to just put in some kind of like pie in the sky proposal that, oh, this would be ideal to do, and then find out later, actually, you know, that's not possible. So it helps you work out what's actually possible within that time frame, who wants to work with you. So yeah, just go for it. I think it's yeah.
Thanks for saying that, Barbara, about the rules. And I think that's just so important to reiterate, is that thing of, like, the role you play in the project, and what is your role, and what do you want to do, what can you do, what do you think. I think through the project award particularly, there's an opportunity to kind of upskill, for sure, in the sense that whether or not you are producing it fully yourself, or you're more of a creative artist on it with, you know, a producer or a marketing manager or an administrator, it really depends project to project and person to person what would be helpful to them. But I think no matter what way you engage with it, you will automatically learn more about what it takes to make and produce and show a piece of work. But I think there's a great opportunity within this award to add a couple of people, like a team around yourself, and there will be different people who have maybe already produced or directed things, and there will be people who haven't, and I suppose it's good for people who haven't maybe to know that they could engage with people to help them on certain aspects that they may feel are beyond their reach, but they could still be the kind of the creative director of something, and that's totally possible. So yeah.
Thanks, Danny. Sorry, I'm just writing in matchinthedark@gmail.com to the chats there for anyone who wants to ask us questions or to get in touch with Barbara or Caelainn with any questions too. And on the growling dog note, I will say goodbye and sign off. But yes, sorry, just to answer someone's question there. These sessions are available on Match in the Dark's YouTube channel, and we'll be putting the first 4 up on matchinthedark.com very shortly. And the last of these events is kind of a direct one-to-one with Sarah Bannon, Director of Literature at the Arts Council, who'll be taking us right through the application form and the do's and don'ts and cans and can'ts. And there'll be plenty of time for question at the end of that. So it'll be kind of a PowerPoint, half-hour PowerPoint with loads of times for questions. So we'll leave it there for today, but thanks very much to everyone for joining us, and special thanks to Caelainn and Bairbre and Danny. I really appreciate it, and good luck with your project award applications and any other project ideas or applications. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, lads.
Bye.
Bye.